Helen Vance lived in a world of quiet, dust-mote stillness. As the head archivist for the crumbling city of Raven's End, her life was a meticulously catalogued tapestry of other people's pasts. Her domain was the basement of the city library, a labyrinth of steel shelves and cardboard boxes smelling of yellowed paper and forgotten memories. She was a guardian of stories no one else cared to remember, a calling she had inherited from her grandfather. Her peace was shattered by the arrival of Corbin Finch. Young, slick, and radiating a predatory ambition, Finch was the newly appointed city manager, a bureaucrat sent to modernize Raven's End. His vision involved budget cuts, and his first target was the redundant archive. History that doesn't generate revenue is a luxury we can't afford, Miss Vance, he said, his smile not reaching his cold eyes. He stood in her archive in an expensive suit, untouched by the dust. This space will be converted into a high-density storage facility for the new digital tax records. You have 30 days to dispose of the contents. Dispose. The word echoed in the silent basement. It meant shredders. It meant dumpsters. It meant the end of 2 centuries of birth certificates, ship manifests, love letters, and council meeting notes. The entire soul of Raven's End, condensed into paper and ink. Ilara fought with a quiet ferocity. She presented reports to the city council on the historical value of the collection. She wrote letters to historical societies. But Finch had already done his work, charming the council with promises of efficiency and cost savings. She was dismissed as a sentimental relic, an obstacle to progress. Worn down and heartsick, she began the agonizing task of deciding what handful of items could be saved. It was during this funeral dirge for her life's work that she found it. Tucked inside a water-stained ledger from 1898, a hidden compartment in the binding gave way to a single, folded piece of vellum. It was a map. Drawn in faded ink, it depicted the coastline of Raven's End not as it was now, but as it had been centuries ago, before the Great Fire of 1901. And in the center of the old merchant's quarter, now a derelict park, was a bold X. Beside it, in her grandfather's elegant handwriting, was a single phrase: the heart of the city, forgotten beneath the green. Her grandfather had been the archivist before her. He had spoken of legends, of the city's founding wealth, lost during the fire. She'd always thought them bedtime stories, but this was real. This was his life's secret, hidden where only another keeper of the records would ever find it. A new, fierce energy coursed through her. Finch wanted to erase history. She would prove its immense, tangible value. Her investigation was conducted in the stolen hours of the night. She cross-referenced the old map with fire insurance records, land deeds, and personal diaries. The X marked the cellar of the old Vance and Sons goldsmith shop, her family's shop, lost in the fire. The founding fortune of Raven's End wasn't a myth. It was a cache of gold and jewels her great-great-grandfather had hidden for safekeeping during the blaze, a secret he'd taken to his grave when he'd never been able to recover it. Armed with irrefutable proof, she confronted Finch in his office. She laid the map and her research on his polished desk. This collection isn't a liability, Mr. Finch. It's the key to a treasure that could fund this city's restoration for a decade. Call off the demolition. Finch's reaction was not the shock and gratitude she expected. A slow, avaricious smile spread across his face. Ilara, this is extraordinary. Thank you for bringing this to me. He picked up the map. The city will be so grateful. The way he said it, the possessive gleam in his eye, filled her with ice-cold dread. He had no intention of sharing this with the city. He saw a personal fortune. That belongs to the archive, she said, her voice tight. It belongs to the city, he corrected smoothly, slipping the map into his desk drawer and locking it. And as city manager, I am its custodian. Your services are no longer required. Security will see you out. He had stolen it just like that. He had the map, the research, and the authority. She was just the crazy archivist he could easily discredit. Public humiliation followed. Finch held a press conference. He announced the discovery of the map, framing it as a triumphant find from his own review of city assets. He mentioned a former employee who had unfortunately missed this incredible find due to her resistance to modern organizational methods. He was lauded as a hero. Ilara was shattered. She sat in her small, silent apartment, surrounded by the few boxes she'd saved, feeling the weight of her failure. She had not only lost her job, she had lost her grandfather's legacy to the very man who wanted to destroy it. But a keeper of records knows that history is written by those who persevere. Finch had the map, but he didn't have her knowledge. He didn't spend decades breathing the stories of the city. He didn't know about the other diary, the one she hadn't brought him, the personal journal of a midwife who described a secret entrance to the old goldsmith's cellar through the coal chute of the building next door, a building long since gone. While Finch's excavation team began noisily, expensively, and fruitlessly digging up the public park, drawing crowds and news cameras, Alara moved at night. With a single flashlight and a small trowel, she found the remains of the old coal chute, now buried under a foot of soil and weeds behind a rusted fence. It took 3 nights of careful, quiet digging. Finally, her trowel hit not dirt but rotted wood. She cleared the area, her heart hammering against her ribs. She pulled aside the wood, revealing a dark, narrow opening and a set of stone steps descending into the earth. The air below was cool and still. She shone her light, and there it was. Not a chest overflowing with coins, but something far more breathtaking. Neat stacks of gold ingots, each stamped with the Vance and Sons mark. Leather bags heavy with uncut gemstones. And along one wall, a row of exquisite gold jewelry and ceremonial artifacts from the city's founding era, a museum's worth of priceless history. She didn't take a single coin. Instead, she took photos. Detailed, high-resolution photos of everything. Then she retreated, carefully covering the entrance once more. The next day, as Finch's crew was once again making front-page news for finding nothing, Alara made her move. She didn't go to the press. She went to the State Historical Preservation Society and the head of the city council, a woman Finch had often belittled. She presented her evidence. The photos, the midwife's diary, the original research that proved the map was her grandfather's work, stolen from her. She revealed that Finch was digging in the wrong place, wasting public funds on a wild goose chase while the real treasure was safe and waiting. The fallout was swift and absolute. Finch was fired on the spot for gross misconduct and attempted embezzlement of city property. The news cycle turned on him with a vengeance. Ilara was offered her job back, with a promotion and a mandate to create a proper museum for the found treasure. But she had a condition. The archive would not only be saved, it would be expanded, digitized, and given a new, state-of-the-art wing, funded by a percentage of the treasure's value. The city council, shamed and eager for good PR, agreed immediately. The grand opening of the Vance Archive and Ravens End Historical Museum was the city's biggest event in decades. Alara stood at the podium, not in a dusty cardigan, but in a simple, elegant dress. She didn't speak of revenge. She spoke of continuity, of the invisible threads of history that connect a community to its soul. She looked out at the crowd, at the faces of her city, and finally felt the quiet stillness return. But it was no longer the stillness of neglect. It was the peaceful, powerful silence of a story, faithfully kept, now proudly told. She was no longer just a keeper of lost things. She was the architect of her city's remembered future. The grand opening of the Vance Archive was more than a civic event. It was a coronation. The once dusty archivist was now Alara Vance, director and chief curator. The new wing was a marvel of modern design, seamlessly integrated with the old library's stonework, a physical manifestation of her philosophy. The past and future in constant, respectful dialogue. Her days of solitary work in a silent basement were over. Now, her life was a whirlwind of board meetings, grant applications, and media interviews. She hired a staff, young, bright-eyed historians and conservators who looked at her with something akin to awe. She relished it. The treasure, carefully catalogued and displayed in stunning, secure cases, became the heart of the museum, drawing tourists and scholars from around the world. Raven's End was on the map, not as a fading post-industrial town, but as a destination. For a year, Alara rode the wave of success. She proved to be a surprisingly adept administrator, her meticulous nature perfectly suited to budgeting and planning. Yet in the quiet moments, a strange emptiness would sometimes whisper to her. The thrill of the hunt was over. The constant, low-grade anxiety of defending her territory against Corbin Finch was gone. She missed the dust. She missed the solitude. She missed the intimate, one-on-one connection with the documents themselves. This quiet yearning led her to initiate a new project, the Raven's End Memory Project. It was an ambitious oral history initiative, aiming to record the stories of the city's oldest residents before they were lost forever. Her staff focused on the digital recorders and video cameras, but Alara always took the initial, handwritten notes. It was her excuse to do what she loved most, to sit and listen. One afternoon, she visited Anya Petrova, a sharp-eyed woman of 90 who had lived in the same house in the old immigrant quarter since she was a child. While a young intern set up the camera, Alara sat with Anya at her kitchen table. a pot of strong tea between them. You want to know about the old days? Anya said, her voice a dry rustle. I'll tell you about the old days. They weren't all gold treasure and fancy museums. Her eyes twinkled with a mischievous light. There were other treasures. And other secrets. She began to speak not of the city's founding, but of its underbelly. She spoke of Prohibition-era smuggling tunnels that ran from the waterfront right under the city square. She spoke of a notorious nightclub owner, Silas, the Shadow Crow, who was said to have vanished in 1933 with a fortune in illicit earnings, leaving behind only rumors and a grieving wife. Everyone thought he ran off to Cuba, Anya whispered, leaning forward. But his wife, Maria, she never believed it. She told my mother he would never leave her. She said he had a secret, a bolt hole. A place to hide if things got too hot, but nobody ever found it. Ilara jotted down notes, her archivist's heart giving a familiar, excited flutter. This was the kind of story she lived for, a human mystery, not a historical footnote. After the formal interview was over, Anya took her hand. In the attic, she murmured, a box of my mother's things. There might be something, take it. Better you have it than it gets thrown out. The box was a treasure trove of ephemera. Dance cards, faded photographs, and a stack of letters tied with a faded ribbon. Among them, Alara found a single, unmarked envelope. Inside was not a letter, but a delicate, hand-drawn schematic. It was a map of the city's underground. The sewer lines, the electrical conduits, and, snaking off from the foundation of what was once the Silver Slipper nightclub, a single, narrow tunnel that ended in a small, hidden chamber beneath the public gardens. Someone had drawn a tiny, careful star there, Sela's crow's bolt hole. A current of pure, undiluted excitement coursed through her. This was her element, a forgotten story, a hidden map, a mystery waiting in the dark. She could launch an official investigation, get permits, assemble a team with ground-penetrating radar, but the thought filled her with a sudden, surprising weariness. That was the path of the director. It would turn into a public spectacle, a media circus. She didn't want a spectacle. She wanted the quiet thrill of discovery for herself, just for a little while. That night, armed with a high-powered flashlight, a measuring tape, and a copy of the schematic, she went to the public gardens. The entrance, according to the map, was hidden behind a false back in a forgotten tool shed used by the groundskeepers. It was exactly where Anya's schematic said it would be. The tunnel was low, narrow, and smelled of damp earth and old stone. It was a tight fit, but she pushed on, her heart pounding not with fear, but with a joy she hadn't felt since she'd first descended into the goldsmith's cellar. This was why she had become an archivist. Not for the board meetings, but for this, the direct, physical connection to a secret past. The tunnel ended in a small, circular chamber. It was not a treasure vault. There were no stacks of gold. Instead, the room was a time capsule. A single, elegant suitcase lay open on a wooden crate. Inside, carefully preserved, was a man's suit, a pair of dancing shoes, a wedding photograph of a handsome, smiling Silas and his beautiful Maria, and a stack of love letters tied with a ribbon. Beside the suitcase was a small, locked strongbox. This wasn't the hideout of a ruthless gangster. It was a sanctuary, a place of memory. Silas hadn't run away. He had been killed, or something had happened to him, before he could retrieve the things that truly mattered to him. Alara didn't open the strongbox. She simply sat there in the silent, earth-scented dark, surrounded by the poignant remnants of a great love story, and felt a profound sense of peace. This secret wasn't meant for a museum display. It was a story that belonged to the city's soul, a quiet truth known only to its keeper. She took only the photograph and one of the letters, the one that spoke of Silas's love for Maria and his dream of one day leaving his shady life behind for her. The rest she left exactly as it was, sealing the chamber once more. Some histories were too fragile, too personal to be put on public view. Their value was in their preservation, not their exhibition. The next day, she tracked down Maria Crow's surviving relatives. She presented them with the photograph and the letter, explaining she had found them during a routine archival review of old city property records. She didn't mention the tunnel or the chamber. The family was overcome with emotion, grateful to have this tangible piece of their grandparents' legendary love story. Watching them, Alara understood her role completely. She wasn't just a collector of facts or a hunter of treasure. She was a bridge, a connector of past and present, a keeper of secrets, both great and small. She returned to the museum, to the budgets and meetings and donor dinners, but something had shifted within her. The emptiness was gone. She had her own secret now, a quiet understanding of the city's hidden heartbeat that nobody else possessed. Later that week, A young researcher approached her with a question about the foundation of the old library itself. As Alara pulled the original architectural plans from a flat file drawer, a single folded piece of vellum, brittle with age, fluttered out from between the pages. It was another map, drawn in the same hand as the first, this one detailing a network of tunnels beneath the library itself. A slow smile spread across Alara's face. The work of a keeper was never truly done. There were always more stories waiting in the quiet dark, just for her. The discovery of the second map, this one leading into the very bowels of the library itself, felt less like a coincidence and more like a direct summons from the past. Ilara Vance stood in the quiet hush of the archival storage room, the brittle vellum trembling faintly in her hand. Her grandfather's distinctive, precise script charted a course through foundations and forgotten crawlspaces, all culminating in a small, marked chamber directly beneath the main reading room. The date scrawled in the corner, October 17, 1954, was a year before his sudden death. A cold thrill, entirely separate from the excitement of the Seala's Crow discovery, traced its way down her spine. This wasn't a smuggler's hideout or a gangster's bolt hole. This was personal. Her grandfather had hidden something here, in the heart of his own domain, and he had left a map for her, knowing that she, the future keeper, would be the one to find it. The weight of her directorship felt suddenly heavier, more constricting. The memory project, the new exhibits, the endless cycle of meetings and reports. It all seemed like a dazzling, distracting noise designed to keep her from this deeper, quieter truth. Her library, was keeping a secret from her. She couldn't share this. Not with her bright-eyed staff, not with the board, and certainly not with the public. This was a covenant between her and the man who had taught her that history was a living, breathing thing, pulsing just beneath the thin veneer of the present. Her investigation had to be conducted in the stolen margins of time. Lunch hours were spent not in the staff room, but in the library's sub-basement, comparing the map to modern architectural blueprints. Late evenings, after the last patron had left and the cleaning crew was finishing its rounds, she would walk the corridors, tapping walls and measuring distances with a laser measurer, her heart pounding at every footstep that echoed in the empty halls. The map was frustratingly cryptic. It spoke in a language of architectural features that had been altered, sealed off, or built over during mid-century renovations. The supposed entrance, according to the drawing, was behind a section of shelving in the periodical's archive, a room that had been converted into a server farm for the library's digital catalog in the 1990s. It was during this solitary, frustrating search that the first cracks in her newfound peace began to appear. The demands of her directorship were relentless. The mayor's office, seeing the museum's success as a template, was pushing for efficiency synergies, suggesting the library and archive budgets be merged and streamlined. A newly elected city councilor, a young, tech-focused disruptor named Liam Walsh, began asking pointed questions in budget meetings about the ROI of preserving paper no one reads. Ilara found herself constantly on the defensive, forced to justify the very existence of her life's work to people who saw knowledge only as data and history, as a useless expense. The ghost of Corbin Finch seemed to be whispering in their ears. Worse, the internal politics of her own institution were shifting. Her success had created envy. Her deputy director, a capable but ambitious man named Mark, began to question her decisions more frequently, positioning himself as a modernizer who could bring the archive into the 21st century without all the sentimental baggage. He saw her preoccupation with the memory project and her solitary wanderings as a distraction from the real work of digitization and public engagement. The pressure was a slow, steady vice. She was being pulled in two directions, toward the luminous, demanding public world of the director, and toward the shadowy, compelling pull of her grandfather's secret. She began to lose sleep, her mind racing with budgetary figures by night and the puzzle of the map by day. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Anya Petrova. During a follow-up visit to drop off copies of the recorded interview, Ilara, exhausted and overwhelmed, let her guard down. She mentioned offhandedly the frustrations of renovating an old building, the nightmare of finding original blueprints. Anya fixed her with those sharp, knowing eyes. 1954, the old woman said suddenly, sipping her tea. I'm sorry, Ilara said. The big renovation, the one they did after the 52 hurricane weakened the East Foundation. My cousin Georgi, he was a foreman on that job. Drove him crazy, he said. The city architect, he was a stubborn old bird. Insisted on changing plans daily. Hired his own crew for the finicky work. Very secretive. Alara's blood ran cold. The city architect in 1954 had been Arthur Vance, her grandfather. Did your cousin ever say what they were doing? Alara asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Anya waved a dismissive hand. Oh, he grumbled, said they built a whole new support wall where one wasn't needed, sealed up old rooms, said it was a waste of money. She pointed a bony finger at Alara. But that architect, your grandfather, he knew his business. If he built a wall, he had a reason. A wall where one wasn't needed. Alara's mind flew back to the map. The chamber was behind a wall her grandfather had built. She returned to the library that night with a new, feverish purpose. The server room in the old periodicals archive was a sterile, humming space, cold from air conditioning. Racks of blinking servers lined the walls. But one wall looked different. The cinder blocks were ever so slightly a different shade of white. It was a false wall, expertly constructed but detectable to a trained eye looking for it. Getting behind it was a problem. She couldn't just start dismantling a load-bearing wall in a room critical to the library's digital infrastructure. She needed a pretext. The solution presented itself through Liam Walsh's relentless pressure. During a particularly tense council subcommittee meeting, he blasted the library's energy inefficiency. That server farm is a dinosaur. We're cooling a whole wing for a system that could be hosted in the cloud for a fraction of the cost. An idea, audacious and risky, clicked into place in Alara's mind. She agreed with him. Counselor Walsh is right, she said, stunning the room into silence. The current setup is unsustainable. I propose we decommission the on-site servers and fully migrate to a cloud-based system. It will be a complex project, but the long-term savings and efficiency gains will be significant. Mark, her deputy, looked at her as if she'd lost her mind. He had been the server farm's biggest champion. Walsh, suspicious but triumphant, agreed immediately. The project was greenlit. For the next 2 months, Alara managed the complex migration with one hand while with the other, she orchestrated the perfect cover story. The server room needed to be completely emptied, its wiring stripped out, and the space assessed for future use. She hired a contractor, a discreet, older firm recommended by Anya Petrova's now-deceased cousin Georgi. The day the last server was powered down and carted away was the day Alara finally walked into the empty, echoing room with a sledgehammer. She didn't swing it herself. She nodded to the foreman of the crew, a taciturn man in his 60s who asked no questions. The first swing cracked the drywall. The second shattered the cinder blocks beneath. Within an hour, they had revealed not solid earth, but a dark, narrow opening behind the false wall, exactly where her grandfather's map had promised it would be. She sent the crew home early, paying them double for their discretion and their silence. Alone, with only the beam of her flashlight cutting through the dust-filled air, she stepped through the opening. The space beyond was small, perhaps 6 feet by 6 feet, and utterly untouched by time. It was not a treasure chamber. It was a time capsule of a single, terrible fear. The walls were lined with shelves, and on those shelves were boxes. Not boxes of gold, but of documents, hundreds of them. And on a small, simple desk in the center of the room sat a heavy, old-fashioned reel-to-reel tape recorder and a single handwritten ledger. With trembling hands, Alara opened the ledger. It was her grandfather's journal, starting in the summer of 1953. And as she read, the beautiful, proud history of Raven's End began to unravel. The journal detailed a secret her grandfather had stumbled upon while researching the city's founding for a centennial celebration. The revered founding fathers, the Vance family included, were not the pious, noble entrepreneurs the history books proclaimed. The initial capital that built the city's first cannery, its docks, its railway line, had not come from legitimate trade. It had come from smuggling, from opium, from coerced labor. The Great Fire of 1901 hadn't been an accident. It had been a deliberate act of arson to destroy a rival smuggling operation and cover up the evidence of their crimes. Arthur Vance had uncovered the truth, and he had been horrified. He'd confided in the then mayor, a direct descendant of another founding family. Instead of being applauded, he was threatened. He was told in no uncertain terms that this truth would never see the light of day. It would destroy the city, shatter families, tear apart the very community it had built. The mayor and his allies, a secret society of the city's most powerful men who called themselves the Keepers of the Flame, gave him a choice. Help them bury the evidence forever, or see his family ruined and his career destroyed. The renovation of 1954 had been a cover. His secret crew had not been building new supports. They had been systematically combing the city's records, the very archives he was sworn to protect, and removing any document that could hint at the truth. They had sealed the incriminating evidence in this room. The tape recorder held the piece de resistance. With a shaking hand, Alara threaded the old tape and pressed play. The voice that crackled to life was her grandfather's, but it was strained, hollow with a fear and guilt that made her want to weep. I have betrayed my oath, the voice whispered into the silence. I have sanitized history. I have become a keeper of lies, not truth. I have done this for my family, for the peace of the city, but my soul is sick with it. If you are hearing this, my dear one, then you have found my confession. I do not know what you should do with it. The truth will cause immense pain. The lie is a poison in our soil. The choice I could not make, I now pass to you. Forgive me. The tape ended with a soft click. Alara sank onto the dusty floor, the ledger clutched in her hands. The weight of it was crushing. Her family's legacy, the city's founding myth, her own identity as its guardian, it was all built on a foundation of rot and silence. Her grandfather hadn't left her a treasure map. He had left her a bomb, and the timer was now ticking in her hands. The world outside this tiny, hidden room, with its budget meetings, its political squabbles, its cheerful museum tour, suddenly seemed like a fragile stage set. The smiling portrait of the founding Vance patriarch that hung in the museum lobby now felt like a grotesque joke. What did she do? Uncover the truth and risk destroying the very city she loved. Or become the latest keeper of the flame, perpetuating the lie her grandfather had been coerced into creating? She heard a noise in the server room outside. A soft footstep on the concrete floor. Her head snapped up. She hadn't heard anyone come in. Ilara, a voice called out. It was Mark, her deputy. His voice was light, curious. The crew said they finished early. I was just doing a final check. What's all this? He stood in the broken opening of the wall, his eyes wide with not just curiosity, but a sharp, avaricious gleam. He was holding his phone, and it was angled slightly, as if he'd been taking pictures. Alara's blood ran cold. She looked from his face to the shelves of damning evidence, to her grandfather's final confession on the desk. The secret was out, and it was in the hands of the one person who would use it not to seek justice, but to seize power for himself. The battle for the soul of Raven's End was no longer a philosophical choice. It had begun. The silence in the secret chamber was absolute, thick with the dust of decades and the weight of a catastrophic truth. Alara Vance remained frozen on the cold floor, her grandfather's damning ledger a dead weight in her lap. Mark stood in the broken open doorway, his figure silhouetted against the sterile light of the empty server room. The avaricious gleam in his eyes had been replaced by something colder, more calculating. He slowly lowered his phone, the screen going dark. Well, 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 he said, his voice unnervingly calm. He took a step into the room, his eyes scanning the shelves of boxes, the reel-to-reel recorder finally landing on her. I knew you were up to something, Alara, all those late nights. The personal projects. But this is beyond anything I imagined. Alara's mind raced, scrambling for purchase on a cliff that was crumbling beneath her. Denial was useless. He'd seen it. He'd probably recorded it. It's not what you think, Mark, she said, her voice hoarse. Isn't it? He picked up a folder from the nearest shelf, blowing off a cloud of dust. He glanced at a shipping manifest from 1898, listing crates of ceramics with a scrawled, coded marginal note that clearly indicated opium. It looks exactly like what I think. The founding myth of Raven's End is a lie, and you've just found the proof. He smiled, a thin, predatory expression. This doesn't belong to you, Alara. This belongs to the city. The irony of his words, echoing Corbin Finch's from a lifetime ago, was a physical blow. He was already positioning himself as the righteous whistleblower, the one who would heroically reveal this dark truth to the world. But she knew him. This wasn't about truth, it was about power. He would use this chaos to unseat her, to present himself as the savior who cleaned house, and he would ride that wave straight into the director's office, or even the mayor's. If you release this carelessly, you'll destroy everything, Alara said, finding a sliver of strength. The city, people's livelihoods, their sense of identity? Some identities are built on rot, he interrupted, his voice dripping with faux sanctimony. They deserve to be torn down. The people have a right to know. He gestured around the room with his phone. And I have a responsibility to tell them. He was already recording again, panning slowly across the shelves, a documentarian of disaster. The question is, where do you stand, Alara? Are you a Vance first, a keeper of the family lie? Or are you the archivist you pretend to be, the one who believes in truth above all else? He was backing her into a corner, forcing her to choose a side for his camera, to become either a villain or a pawn in his narrative. She saw her life's work: the museum, the archive, the carefully reconstructed trust of the city, teetering on the brink. She saw the angry, hurt faces of the citizens of Raven's End, feeling betrayed by their own history. She saw Mark, triumphant, using their pain as a stepping stone. A cold, clear fury began to cut through her panic. He didn't care about the truth. He cared about the spectacle. He was no better than the keepers of the flame. He just used different tools. "Get out," she said, her voice low and steady. Mark stopped his recording, surprised. "What?" "Get out of this room," she repeated, rising to her feet. The ledger felt like a shield in her hands. "This is a city archive. This material is under my custodianship. You are not authorized to be here. You are trespassing on a secured historical site." He blinked, thrown by her sudden shift to bureaucratic authority. "You can't be serious. You're going to try and hide this." "After everything? I'm going to do my job," she said, her voice ice, "which is to assess, preserve, and contextualize historical materials, not to leak them for political clout. Now, get out." For a long moment, they stood in a silent standoff, the air crackling with hostility. Mark's jaw tightened. He knew she had the legal authority. He also knew that if he forced the issue now, she could have him removed by security and discredit him as an opportunistic trespasser. "This isn't over," he hissed, pocketing his phone. "You can't bury this, I know, and I will make sure everyone knows that you tried." He turned and left, his footsteps echoing angrily back through the server room. The moment he was gone, Alara's knees buckled. She leaned against the dusty desk, her heart hammering. She had bought herself a reprieve, but it was a temporary one. Mark would not wait long. He would go to the press, to the council, to anyone who would listen, and paint her as the villainous descendant trying to cover up her family's sins. She was alone, horribly, utterly alone. She couldn't go to the police. This wasn't a crime, it was a historical and political earthquake. She couldn't go to the board. They would panic and side with whoever offered the simplest solution, which would likely be to bury the evidence and fire her. Mark was right about one thing: she couldn't bury this. The truth had a way of seeping out. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. "The choice I could not make, I now pass to you." He had been a good man trapped by the powerful. She was the director, she was the powerful. She had a platform, a reputation, and a responsibility he never had. She couldn't just reveal the truth or hide it. She had to control it. She had to do what Arthur Vance could not. She had to restore the narrative. The next 72 hours were a blur of sleepless, clandestine activity. She moved like a ghost through the library after hours. She acquired a high-speed document scanner and brought it into the secret chamber. She worked through the night, digitizing everything. Page after page of damning ledgers, shipping manifests, personal letters between the founding fathers that detailed their crimes with a chilling casualness. She digitized her grandfather's anguished journal and the heartbreaking audio confession. She created multiple encrypted copies, storing them on separate drives hidden in different locations. The original physical documents she carefully repacked, but she removed her grandfather's journal and the tape. Those she could not bear to leave behind. Her plan was not to destroy the evidence, but to own it completely. She would become the sole source of the truth. And then, she would frame its unveiling not as a sensational scandal, but as the final, crucial chapter of Raven's End story. A story of confronting a difficult past to build a more honest future. It was a gargantuan, perhaps impossible task. It required not just courage, but a historian's skill, a politician's cunning, and a storyteller's art. Mark made his move 3 days later. A prominent investigative journalist from a major metropolitan newspaper, a friend of Mark's, called Alara for comment on explosive allegations regarding Raven's End's founding and a subsequent cover-up involving the city's archivist. The trap was sprung. Alara knew the journalist would have already heard Mark's version, the heroic deputy uncovering the corrupt director hiding the dark truth. Instead of denying it, Alara surprised her. "I'm glad this has come to light," she said, her voice projecting a weary relief. "It's a burden I've been carrying alone for a few days now. The discovery is authentic, and it's far more complex and tragic than I suspect Mr. Ellis has conveyed. This isn't a simple scandal. It's our city's deepest, most painful history, and it deserves to be treated with care, not as a political football." She invited the journalist, a sharp woman named Lena Cruz, to the museum the next day. "Come alone, see what we've found, hear the full story." When Lena arrived, Alara didn't take her to the secret chamber. She took her to the museum's conservation lab. On a large table, under soft lights, she had laid out a curated selection of the documents: the opium manifests, the arson orders, alongside her grandfather's journal, open to a key passage of his torment. She played the tape. She watched Lena's face shift from skeptical reporter to stunned historian as Arthur Vance's haunted voice filled the room. "This isn't about tearing down our founders," Alara said softly when the tape ended. "It's about understanding them as complex, flawed men. It's about the terrible choice my grandfather faced. And it's about how we, as a city, choose to move forward. Do we hide from this? Or do we integrate it into our story and become stronger for our honesty?" She then unveiled her plan. She wouldn't just give Lena the story. She would give her exclusive, phased access. The museum would launch a landmark, year-long exhibition, Raven's End, re-examining the foundation. It would tell the whole, unvarnished truth, using the very documents in this room. Lena would get the first and deepest look, with the understanding that her reporting would be nuanced, historical, and human-centered, not sensationalist. Lena, mesmerized by the sheer historical magnitude of it and disarmed by Alara's transparency, agreed on the spot. Mark's attempt to create a firestorm was being transformed into a carefully managed, academically rigorous unveiling. The following weeks were the most demanding of Alara's life. She worked with Lena on the initial articles, which presented the discovery as a profound historical moment, not a salacious scandal. She presented her exhibition plan to the city council and the museum board. The reaction was predictably tumultuous. Some, like Councillor Walsh, saw dollar signs in the tourism potential of a forbidden history. Others were horrified, fearing the city would become a laughingstock. But Alara stood firm. "We are not defined by the crimes of our ancestors," she argued. "We are defined by how we handle their legacy. We can be the city that was built on a lie, or we can be the city brave enough to tell the truth." She used all her political capital, every ounce of respect she had earned. She slowly, painfully, built a coalition of supporters. Mark, realizing his coup had been co-opted, grew desperate. He went public with his own version, accusing Alara of initially trying to hide the discovery. But his story now seemed sloppy and self-serving next to Alara's measured, comprehensive approach. He was sidelined, then quietly dismissed for his breach of protocol and attempted extortion. The exhibition opened on a cold autumn day. The museum was surrounded by news vans from across the country. Inside, it was packed, but the atmosphere was not one of morbid curiosity. It was one of solemn, sober reflection. Visitors moved slowly through the displays, reading the damning evidence, but also reading Arthur Vance's journal, listening to his confession, understanding the human cost of the lie. Alara stood to the side, watching. She saw older citizens shaking their heads in disbelief, and younger ones nodding with a new understanding of the city's complexities. She saw historians taking furious notes. She saw a community not shattering, but knitting itself together around a harder, darker, but more honest truth. Anya Petrova found her in the crowd, taking her hand. The old woman's eyes were bright. "He would be proud of you," she said simply. "You didn't just keep the secrets, you healed them." The exhibition was a staggering success, acclaimed for its bravery and integrity. Book offers poured in. Alara was invited to speak around the world, but her work wasn't done. In a quiet corner of the exhibition, she had placed a final, interactive display. It was a digital terminal connected to the complete, scanned archive from the secret room. A placard above it read, "The work continues. Help us uncover the rest of our story." The Memory Project had evolved. It was now a citywide initiative, a collective effort to re-examine every aspect of Raven's End's history in light of this new truth. People brought in old family letters, diaries, and photographs, seeing them with new eyes, finding their own connections to the larger, darker narrative. One evening, months later, Alara returned to the secret chamber. It was no longer sealed. It was now a part of the official archive, a restored historical site in its own right. She sat at her grandfather's desk, now cleaned and preserved. She had made her choice. She had not been a keeper of the flame, and she had not been a destroyer. She had been a restorer. She had taken a fractured, dangerous truth and pieced it back into the city's story, making it whole in a way it had never been before. The silence around her was no longer the silence of a buried secret. It was the peaceful, powerful silence of a story finally, fully told. She picked up her grandfather's ledger, now just one artifact among many, and carried it out into the light. The success of Raven's End, re-examining the foundation, was not an endpoint. It was a catalyst. The museum, once a quiet repository of a polished, comfortable past, had become the city's living room for a difficult, ongoing conversation. Ilara Vance, who had once curated silence, now found herself presiding over a constant, vibrant hum of discourse. School groups debated ethics in the exhibition hall, university historians held symposia in the auditorium, and citizens gathered for truth and reconciliation town halls, sharing family stories that now intersected with the city's darker narrative in startling ways. Ilara embraced this new role, but a subtle exhaustion began to seep into her bones. The fight had taken its toll. The constant political maneuvering, the weight of her grandfather's guilt, the relentless energy required to steer an entire community through an existential crisis. It had left her feeling hollowed out. She was the calm, capable director on the outside, but inside she felt like one of the fragile documents in her care, slowly fading from overexposure. The city, however, was thriving on the notoriety. Dark tourism became its unexpected new industry. Bus Tour now pointed out the sites of former opium warehouses alongside the historic cannery. A popular podcast series, The Raven's End Paradox, dissected the founding family's crimes. Counselor Walsh, ever the opportunist, proposed a themed restaurant called The Smuggler's Den. Ilara vetoed it, but the mere suggestion made her shudder. Were they healing, or were they just monetizing their trauma? This gnawing concern crystallized around a new discovery, one that emerged not from the hidden chamber, but from the flood of materials citizens were now bringing to the memory project. A young woman named Chloe brought in a heavy, leather-bound ledger she'd found in her grandmother's attic. It wasn't from the Vance Cannery or the city's founding era. It was from the 1920s, and it belonged to her great-grandfather, Alastair Crowe, Silas's younger brother. While the ledger mostly contained mundane records for a modest import-export business, one recurring entry caught Alara's eye. A monthly disbursement of a significant sum to an entity listed only by the initials, KF. The payments continued like clockwork for years, then stopped abruptly in the winter of 1933. The same season Silas Crowe vanished. A cold dread, different from the shock of her grandfather's revelation, settled in Alara's stomach. The keepers of the flame. They hadn't dissolved after the 1950s cover-up. They had persisted. And Alastair Crowe had been paying them protection money. Her investigation this time was not a solitary pursuit. She brought in Lena Cruz, the journalist, whose skills as an investigator complemented Alara's archival expertise. They became an unlikely duo, the meticulous keeper of records and the tenacious hunter of stories. What they uncovered was a shadow history of Raven's End, a parallel city running beneath the surface of the one everyone knew. The KF payments weren't an isolated case. They found similar coded entries in the records of a dozen other small businesses from the 20s to the 50s: butchers, tailors, a bookshop. The keepers hadn't just been protecting a historical secret. They had been running a sophisticated protection racket, leveraging the founding family's power and influence to control the city's economy for generations. The organization's methods had evolved with the times. The strong-arm tactics of the past gave way to more subtle forms of coercion. Zoning laws mysteriously changed to benefit allies, city contracts steered toward certain companies, permits for competitors lost in the bureaucracy. The keepers were no longer a secret society. They were the establishment itself. They didn't need to meet in secret lodges. They met in golf clubs, at charity galas, in the mayor's office. The current mayor, a genial third-generation politician named Edward Shaw, had initially been a strong supporter of Alara's work. But as Lena's new articles began to hint at a modern-day connection, his support cooled noticeably. He urged caution, warning against spreading unsubstantiated conspiracy theories that could harm the city's economic recovery. Alara realized with a sinking feeling that the battle was not over. She had won a victory over the past, but the present was still infected by its same rot. The keepers of the flame were still here, and she was threatening their power. The attack, when it came, was not a confrontation in a secret chamber. It was a sleek, professional audit of the museum's finances, ordered by the mayor's office. It was followed by a series of op-eds in the local paper, questioning the exorbitant cost of the memory project and suggesting the funds would be better spent on practical city services. It was a campaign of bureaucratic suffocation, designed to look like prudent governance while it slowly strangled her work. Then, the personal attacks began. Anonymous online profiles began spreading rumors about Alara's management style, painting her as a tyrannical leader obsessed with the past at the expense of her staff. They dug up her initial hesitation over the server room migration, twisting it into evidence of her technophobia and incompetence. It was a smear campaign executed with modern precision. Mark, her former deputy, gleefully emerged from the shadows to give these rumors a voice, giving interviews about her paranoid and secretive behavior. Alara felt the walls closing in. The public, so recently on her side, began to fracture. Comments on news articles asked, "Why is she so obsessed with dragging our city's name through the mud?" The unified spirit of the exhibition began to crumble under a manufactured narrative of division and doubt. Lena argued for a full frontal assault in her newspaper, publish everything they had on the modern keepers. But Alara hesitated. She had no smoking gun like her grandfather's tape. She had patterns and ledgers and correlations, powerful to a historian, but easy for a skilled politician to dismiss as circumstantial. A public accusation without ironclad proof would only make her look desperate and paranoid, playing right into their hands. She was losing, she could feel it. The energy she had left was being drained by the daily grind of defending her budget, her reputation, her sanity. She stopped sleeping, haunted by the feeling that her grandfather's curse was inescapable. The truth was afire, and it was burning her alive. Her breaking point came when she received a sealed, unmarked envelope at her home. Inside was a single, grainy photograph. It was a picture of her, taken through the window of her apartment, sitting in her living room reading a book. There was no note. The message was clear: "We are watching. We can reach you anywhere. Stop." Terror, cold and absolute, washed over her. This wasn't about politics anymore. This was a threat. Desperate, she did the only thing she could think of. She went back to the beginning. She went to Anya Petrova. The old woman was frailer now, but her eyes were still sharp. She listened as Alara, her voice shaking, poured out everything: the ledgers, the mayor's opposition, the audit, the smear campaign, the photograph. When Alara finished, Anya was silent for a long time, staring out the window at the fading light. "The keepers," she finally said, the word a sigh of disgust. "My father called them the crows. He said they picked at the bones of the city, taking their share from anything that grew." She turned her gaze to Alara. "You think they are powerful men in suits. And they are, but they are also afraid. You have taken away their past. Now you threaten their present. A cornered animal is the most dangerous." "What do I do?" Alara whispered, the question a plea. Anya leaned forward, her voice dropping. "You cannot fight them in their world with their weapons. Their power is money, influence, lies. Your power is the truth, but you must wield it like a scalpel, not a sledgehammer." She told Alara a story then, a piece of gossip her mother had heard from a friend who worked as a maid for the mayor's family in the 1960s. It was a small, seemingly insignificant story about a land deal, a fire, and a payoff. A story that involved the current mayor's grandfather. It was a single thread, but it was a start. Alara and Lena began to work in absolute secrecy, communicating through encrypted channels. They stopped looking for a vast conspiracy and started following the single, thin thread. They cross-referenced property records, old insurance claims, and newspaper archives from the 1960s. The thread led to another, and then another. They weren't uncovering a monster. They were mapping a circulatory system, a network of favors, debts, and silent partnerships that stretched from the founding families to the present day, all leading back to a single, central figure: Mayor Edward Shaw. He wasn't just a beneficiary of the system, he was its modern-day architect, the latest keeper of the flame. They had their target, but they still had no proof that would stand up in a court of law or the court of public opinion. The proof arrived from an unexpected source: Chloe, the young woman who had brought in Alastair Crow's ledger. Cleaning out the rest of her grandmother's attic, she found a small, locked strongbox. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a stack of letters. They were love letters, not to Alastair's wife, but to another woman. And tucked between the pages of one passionate missive was a receipt. It was a receipt for a $5,000 payment from Alastair Crow to one E. Shaw, the mayor's grandfather, dated the week after the suspicious fire that had cleared the land for a lucrative development. The receipt was annotated in Alastair's hand: "Final payment. KF matter settled." It was the link. The direct, undeniable connection between the historical protection racket and the current mayor's family. Alara didn't go public. She didn't call a press conference. She requested a private meeting with Mayor Shaw in his office. She placed the receipt on his desk. She said nothing. He picked it up, his face a mask of confusion that slowly cracked, revealing the cold, calculating man beneath. He looked from the receipt to her, his eyes devoid of the geniality he showed the public. "What is this?" he asked, his voice flat. "The end of the game?" Alara said, her own voice steady, though her heart was hammering. I have the rest of the story, the ledgers, the patterns, the whole history of the keepers, and I have this. I'm giving you a choice my grandfather never had. Resign, cite health reasons, family reasons, I don't care. Disband whatever is left of that rotten society. Or I will not take this to the press. I will take it to the state attorney general's office for investigation into public corruption, racketeering, and conspiracy. And I will make sure every citizen of Raven's End knows the Shaw family legacy. She held his gaze. It was a brutal, naked power play. It was the kind of thing the keepers would have done. But she was using their weapon, fear, to destroy their world forever. Shaw stared at her, and for a moment, she saw the immense weight of his inherited corruption, the weary arrogance of a man who had never been held to account. Then, the fight drained out of him. He gave a single, curt nod. 2 weeks later, Mayor Edward Shaw announced his sudden retirement due to unforeseen family health concerns. The audit of the museum was quietly canceled. The smear campaign stopped overnight. There was no dramatic arrest, no sensational trial. The city, weary of scandal, accepted the story at face value. But in the quiet corridors of power, a seismic shift had occurred. The old networks went silent. Contracts were awarded openly. The shadow over Raven's End finally began to lift. Alara stood once more in the museum's main hall. The exhibition on the city's foundation was now a permanent installation. She walked to the interactive terminal, where a visitor was scrolling through digitized pages of Alastair Crow's ledger. She had not just restored a historical narrative. She had surgically removed a cancer that had been growing for over a century. The cost had been her innocence, her peace, and a part of her soul. She had looked into the abyss of power and had not flinched, and it had changed her forever. She was no longer just the keeper of lost things. She was the guardian of the light. And she knew, with a weary certainty, that the work of guarding the light was never done. It was a vigil that would last a lifetime. But for the first time, she felt equal to it. The silence around her was no longer filled with ghosts, but with the quiet, steady hum of a city finally, truly free.